Good evening, folks. Good evening, YouTube. Good evening, Facebook. Good evening, Jokoistas. I'm Youssef, a Jokoista, poet and professor, and with my wonderful partner, comrade, Tasha. Hi, Tasha.
Hi, Yusuf, and greetings for everyone who is joining us now or will join us in the next few days, the next few weeks, the next few months, whenever you decide to give us a look. Hello, um, good evening, and welcome to Joko Conversations. Um, so glad to have the opportunity once again to chop it up and do our part for pushing toward the world we want, pushing for
Mhm.
a world
That's
centered
right.
around that which is just, that which is true, that which is, that is ever pushing toward that, the attention toward that goal, rather than the descendant tendencies that we all know humanity can express. There are these other things that we can do, that we choose to do, and we choose to have, um, and look forward to having societies and polities that are organized around the actual good of all the people involved in the polity, right? Part of that society, and the reduction of violence, the reduction of harm, the reduction of suffering and misery, without excuse, without delay, without compromise, and all of those things. That's what we wish to contribute to. And so we also always open by acknowledging that we do this because of our personal lineages and the um, combination of choices and accidents and lucky incidences that make us people of um, conscience and willingness, that put us in the coalition of the willingness to do this work. Part of this has to do with the folks who raised us or influenced us, and we acknowledge also those heroes of the African family at large that have been engaged um, in millennia of building dynamic culture and advancing the human cause on the planet, as well as this more recent uh, meeting of the challenge of European world domination under white supremacy, militarism, capitalism, and all the things that make human life miserable and have proven to make human life miserable. Um, and we acknowledge that the work we do at the hospitality of the First Nations people on this Turtle Island, on which we now, I think we're both sitting, so in which we
Yes.
are now sitting, right? And
Yes.
and we are in gratitude also to be able to recognize that we owe that acknowledgement. And so, having said all of that, pass it back to our illustrious.
Oh,
Um, yes, absolutely
illustrious.
illustrious. Yes,
Don't
you.
make me blush. Don't make me blush.
Okay, because you know it's true. Yes, right.
That's right.
That's
There's something you said earlier before you made me illustrious and blush. I really did get illustrious, right?
illustrious.
But
Yes.
yeah, you can't necessarily see the rose in the cheeks right now. It should be a purple. They are actually a red. The but yeah, that world, as you reference, the being, participating, right, in making the world we want to live in, that more humane world, equitable world, peaceful, world. It reminded me that we still have to invite our musicians on, right, to talk about, you know, their art in the world, on the path to that world we want, and in that world, right, we want. Um, so that's a good reminder, that we need to, yeah, invite our musicians on for that final conversation. The But we're not here to talk about art, tonight, right? Really, the way things are often, like, in an academic setting, categorize the arts and the sciences, right? And we're actually here to talk about, to pick up on our theme of the right wing, um, particularly in this contemporary moment, the right wing, um, attempt to roll back, right, the most progressive aspects of the modern era of modernity. Um, and yeah, we can even say of modernity, insofar as modernity has been the period in which the notion of the common person, right, has been empowered, right, through various democratic reforms, and even the success of the bourgeois revolution, right, to in the West, and the disruption of the assumption of aristocratic rule, and really world over, right, as it turns out. The And part of that pushback, very, very recently, but really, I guess there's always been a long history of it, is the denial of, the antagonism toward what we commonly understand as science, in the contemporary world, right? What we commonly understand as science, and even that which people don't necessarily think of as scientific or science. Um, and in the context of an attack also on education, right? The dismantling of, educational systems, and even the
Mm,
lack of, or unwillingness of the United States to ever federally like consolidate its educational system, right, and equitably fund, all school districts. Leaving it to the states is, one way to devolve it and keep it uneven. Um, that those go together, right? And it's just now more, just an incredibly open attack on scientific research, um, that all that previous 40 years has been leading up to.
mm-hmm.
Because rhetorically, how long has science been under attack rhetorically? Um,
Hmm.
and what we mean by science, which we also know is not neutral, even in terms of, being supportive of, and fully integrated or integral to, capitalist systems, capitalist, economy and production, right? Um, but even there, right, so much of the research that ends up becoming, um, privatized at some point
Mm,
begins with public funding of research at universities. So again, tied to the educational system.
mm-hmm.
So
Mm.
anyway,
Tied
let
to
me.
the
Uh huh. Go ahead.
tied to the educational system in that very practical way, and in terms of, again, that set of ideals, um, of the right, the potency and the value of education to,
Mhm.
right, uplift human beings and therefore to uplift human society, with a very,
Mhm.
you know, real expectation that upliftment, right,
Mhm.
was a move toward, in the context of what we've been talking about in terms of the modern, what you just described in terms of the, what is meant for the life of the common man and the turn away from aristocracy, the or the exalting, we should say, of aristocracy,
Right.
at the risk of
Aristocracies
being
of what?
ironic,
Right.
privileging the
Right. Yeah.
aristocratic human,
Yeah.
over the common human. But all of those kinds of ideals, the ideal of education, to contribute to that progressive trajectory or
Mhm.
democratization of power toward,
Right.
right, toward drawing out the best and most innovative toward, you
Mhm.
know
Mhm.
making the world a better place, right, like
Mhm.
the was it Salk? You'll have to um clarify this for me, but the polio vaccine uh, person said, and this is for humanity. This
This
is
is
not
for
for
humanity. That's
personal
right.
gain. This is not for my da 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 da. That
That's
the
right.
heart
And
of,
to the best of my knowledge, he never earned any money off of it, or to the best of my knowledge, I don't know that he had any shares of any whomever, whatever. Right.
yeah, you know
So
what, and yeah, which would be wonderful if it was to be discovered that he did in some way. You know what I'm saying? Even that, I'm just going to say
he was
the
clear in that purpose,
the
though.
assertion, exactly, and
You
he's not
know.
alone in that, right?
Right.
Even the right the Oppenheimer, right,
Hmm.
staunch um advocate for disarmament, right,
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
defining the definer the define one of the defining thinkers of the principles of disarmament and
Hmm.
disavowing of use of atomic energy for weaponry. You know what I mean? That kind of thinking about the value of advancing thinking, advancing thought, advancing understanding, which all human societies value. There is not a human
Right.
society that does not value knowing, knowledge. You know what I'm
Right.
saying?
Exactly.
Um,
And its pursuit.
and its pursuit
That's
for
right.
the sake of
And
uplifting.
you
Yeah,
know some level of, and actually I wonder about that sometimes,
I know.
some level of respect, right, or for
Hmm.
those who pursue knowledge, right, who have that bent, and
Yes,
will be supported by the societies in some ways, traditional societies,
absolutely.
modern societies. And my hesitation for a moment was because so often, those are also there's still often an ambivalence there, right? Because new discoveries are unsettling, right? And so also can be very quickly scapegoated. But I'm really thinking primarily of like Western experience
Hmm.
there, right? I mean, I have
Hmm.
to say, right,
Hmm.
more than anything. Um,
Hmm.
the poor way in which, certainly in the United States, so I'm not even sure I should say so broadly Western. Um, you know, uh, there's a lot of rhetorical support of teachers, but there's just as much, sort of dismissing of teachers, and I think at least in pop culture, in the United States, there have been elements of that, right, for quite a while. even in Hollywood movies of the 30s and 40s and stuff. And, so anyway, um,
Mm,
that was my hesitation, right?
mm-hmm,
And that teachers are often when um, a society begins going authoritarian,
mm-hmm,
um, or
mm-hmm,
further right,
mm-hmm,
and maybe some people will say for any extreme, right? Teachers become suspect
mm-hmm,
in those societies, and
mm-hmm.
um, yeah, just that. Right? Teachers become suspect, right? And we already talked about, or earlier, or I guess just yesterday, was it the teacher in Idaho who was asked to have her everyone's welcome here posters taken down,
Mm-hmm.
um, because they might be offensive to someone, or something, their personal opinion,
This person
something,
is so
whatever.
awful.
But again, and that's
Yeah.
probably just one example, and indeed it is just one example of,
Yeah.
even before the current
Yeah.
regime was in and has intensified, and magnified these efforts. That was all, those kinds of things were already happening. So uh,
Yeah. Um, it's something that is occurring to me, right? As we're talking about, is this
mhm,
kind of the way this kind of uh, authoritarian, um, if we can say that, authoritarian government forms or governing forms are, uh, as we've known them in the Western world and in their worst excesses, because I mean, it all kind of, right, it shrinks power and control to the, ultimately to the idiosyncrasies of a few or a one,
mhm,
in right, and exposes the many, puts the many at the, subject to the whim of those
mhm,
ultimately idiosyncrasies, and this is like, kind of part of this concept that, you need other people to, you just need, just to, right, just on a micro level, you're kind of a better person when you have a whole lot of other people to bounce yourself off of, and you're not, you know what I mean?
mhm,
It assumes that no individual has all of the components that are needed,
mhm,
but just kind of, in how we understand things, but this the necessity of having under control that which is literally the crown of our humanity, to, to have this stuff under control, either, by controlling the generation of information and knowledge, or its transmission, or the quality of it, right, literally to um uplift these other functions, I'm resisting saying lower functions, but it's kind of like, it's like an age old, um what, competition, you know in, I don't know, not that I know them all, but very common in human wisdoms, the recognition that there is a competition between appetite and wisdom. There's a ongoing kind of competition, between doing that which is best, and doing that which may gratify some other, the notion of the base emotions and the higher,
mhm,
you know what I mean?
mhm,
That's not
mhm,
something that's a strictly Western or Greek or ideation by any means. It's a universal, ideation. And there's something, all of this is to say, it is quite interesting that, the way this kind of onslaught and the way this form of control needs to subjugate that which makes us the best of what we are, in order to manipulate us by way of that which can make of us the worst of what we are. The thing, we don't
Hmm.
need to be guided by our appetites, by our
Well,
fear.
capitalism needs us to be guided by our appetites.
Needs that.
It needs
Absolutely.
us to be consumers, right? And of everything, right? Some kind, right? So it
Yeah.
in some way, right? It's always appealing to the appetites again, rather than right, any sort of wisdom. Uh, um, yeah, if we want to try to avoid that language of higher and lower, but certainly,
Yeah.
I like that, that that term, that word appetite, yeah, because that it wants us wanting, not
Mhm.
worrying about needing. Wanting
Mhm.
is enough, right? And
Mhm.
fulfill your wants,
Mhm.
right? Capitalism and so structures everything in such a way, right, that
Mhm.
and especially um the ability for masses to try to satisfy those appetites. um Although, well, we'll see, right? This attack on everything,
Mhm.
concentrating, the disposable income upwards,
Mhm.
may be going back to a 19th century.
Mhm.
Um, it's the top 1%, 5% that's driving all consumption, because
Right.
they got all the money, and
Right.
everybody else is in some way serving them and barely getting by. And
Right. And
um,
they're consuming big stuff, so
yeah,
the
exactly. Um,
it's not all spent on potato chips. Yeah. Go
but
ahead.
anyway, some of this stuff, right? Some of these, again, this direct attack on scientific understanding, right? And even what what at least in the moment is scientific fact, until scientific inquiry proves that there are no that was mistaken. Here's more factual, because again, science is open ended, right? I think people,
Mhm.
again, one of those misunderstandings.
Mhm.
What is apparently being missed in a lot of scientific education,
Yes.
is science is open, right? It's
Mhm.
this is based on the evidence we have now, right? And
Mhm. Mhm.
no, science does not understand everything, and it is a
Mhm.
process of trying to understand and building on what we know.
Mhm.
Um, so before we came on, as I told you, I was watching a YouTuber, a science communicator. The channel, the YouTube channel is Gutsick Gibbon, um, and the presenter's name is Erica,
Mhm.
who describes herself, among other things, as a fourth year PhD student in bioanthropology.
Mhm.
Got Sig Given YouTube channel. The So she was, I was briefly checking it out as she was playing clips from a self-professed Christian nationalist, but the tagline, right, proud of failing um, middle school science. So there's that aspect of it, right? I found that significant.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
found it significant
Mm.
because it demonstrates a particular attitude, and even maybe encouragement of students, children, grandchildren, etc., not to take their science studies seriously. A lot of
Mhm.
folks coming out of the church,
Mhm.
or ready to be oppositional um,
Mhm. Mhm.
to that. Now, I believe the guy's name was Donald Wilson. Um, he's not a young man, right?
Mhm.
The images of him. He's not a young man. He's a gray beard like me. So I don't, when he was the fact that he calls it, or well, I don't know if he called it middle school or she called it middle school. But
Mhm.
um, that's at least, you know, if he is my age and he's talking and he uses that language. um, I mean, we're already, you know, what we don't know about DNA and genetics at that time, even though, right, there, you know, there's genetics going on, but we found more, right? DNA had been discovered, but, you know, not fully understood. um, you know, we still got the theory of evolution and the you know, and
Mhm.
the Big Bang theory and all these things that challenge the Abrahamic religions, um, you know, description of the creation of the world. And there's certainly a sector of the um, faith community, right, the believing community, that are unwilling to adjust their reading, right, of they're reading that scripture literally. Um, Again, I don't even know if they are a majority as such in among believers just of the Abrahamic religions worldwide. But they're certainly significant and vocal, right, and have been activist about challenging a lot of, you know, scientific inquiry, scientific um, explanation of the world we live in, right, the material world, and he indeed condemns science for its materialism.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and the notion, you know, the insult, as it were, for
Mhm.
many of them, and again, and even beyond this particular group of, you know, believers, of that we might be related to monkeys, or, you know, descendants of monkeys, which is a misunderstanding of the
Right.
theory.
Right.
But, you know, we understand the sentiment, though, that those people are expressing, that somehow, you know, that diminishes humans, right? To
Mhm.
um, and challenges, you know, their notion of God and God's omnipotence, and even their understanding of their scripture, right? Of what that is, what kind of literature that is, even if they would use the language literature, right, to describe it. So,
Mhm. Mhm.
you know, there's that antagonism that teachers actually face.
Mhm.
But of course, from children
Mhm.
who are being encouraged to do so, right?
Mhm.
And indeed are coming into colleges
Mhm.
warned against believing their professors when they try to teach them about evolution,
Mhm.
um, or etc. Secularism of any kind um,
Mhm.
is quite strong, right? So
Mhm.
we're in a world where people are seriously
Mhm.
asserting
Mhm.
any number of
Mhm.
scientifically, I think I can say,
Mhm.
debunked,
Mhm. Mhm.
or scientific impossibilities, like dinosaurs and humans roam the earth at the same time.
Mhm.
The earth is flat.
Mhm.
I mean,
Mhm. And the
for example, yeah.
popularization, right. And the popularization of those notions, the things speak to two things, right? A failure, whether it is because of a whether the failure is willful, or to whatever extent, I should say, the failure is willful and or just unwitting, but the failure to um, properly communicate, right? Teach, inform, whatever those words are. Um, those properly communicate, right? The scientific unfold, these things that have been unfolding, these understandings that have been unfolding in the way that they have unfolded to broader and broader populations, or enough of the population, so certain
Hmm.
things, right? So these things took on more to track um, reduction in success, say in math, science, and other literacies, really, in American students and U.S. students, but a failure to substantively respond to that. But in any event, a failure to properly communicate, as you said, the actual integrity of the quote unquote scientific approach, right? Or a proper um, uh, 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 what is the attempt to explain phenomena through material means, and how that works, and what the disciplines are involved in that works, and how all of that works, right? So there's not an understanding, like a widespread ability to discern that when the scientist says I don't know, or it's inconclusive, and the person who has not pursued a subject scientifically says I don't know, those are two different I knows. The
Mm-hmm.
summary and the comparison doesn't end at I don't know. You know what I'm saying? The
Mm-hmm.
whole attitude toward knowing and understanding are different things. So there's a failure to certainly spread that understanding. There's a failure to spread the understanding of the different stages, to properly communicate the different stage. How do we come to this
Mm-hmm.
commonly held understanding, right? Um, and it's just reduced to a recitation, kind of oversimplified narrative,
Mm-hmm.
a recitation of certain events, that are pivot points,
Mm-hmm.
a story of our presumed trajectory toward, right, never ending progress, never ending growth. It's this kind of thing, which is also has its own anti-scientific, unscientific quality. You know what I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying? So all of this does get reduced to a question of belief. You know what I'm saying? Even if we were saying, I believe in science, you believe in it. You don't understand how it works. You don't know enough to make a discerning judgment when a set
Are
of
you're not asserting that in the same way someone will assert, um, well, that's your belief, right, to a
no,
scientist.
no. But what I am saying is this, right? And part of why it's at the forefront is when I was disputing, right? And this was some years ago, right? And I was kind of looking into the um the debunking of climate science denial, right? And there were a number of folk who were, scientists who were developing talking points
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
points of, that were, breaking down the disinformation that was being put out. And so I got into a conversation with my neighbor, who is definitely um, in the vein of, you know, definitely a consumer of these disinforming literatures, and she raised to me one of these oft repeated points about global warming. Well, this is just a natural turn of events, and the alarmists are, trying to make something out of that's just a natural turn of events. There are cooling periods, there are warming
Mm-hmm.
periods, and da 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 da. And what I realized, right, in that moment was that there was nothing that I knew, that I believed that this was correct. This was my tendency, but there was nothing that I had in my storehouse of information that I could really say, okay, this is the why. Even if I could speak about glaciation periods versus warming periods and melting, you know what I'm saying? Even if I have those
Mm-hmm.
basic ideas, I wouldn't be able to communicate to her. I didn't have enough science to communicate to her the why
Yeah,
of the
but
distinction.
not because it doesn't exist, just because it
No,
wasn't at your
this so
hand. It wasn't
therefore
at hand for you, right?
it
So
wa-
there's just because there's a difference.
there
Um,
is there
yeah.
is a difference, but what I am indicating though is that the point at which I don't
Mhm.
have that information, I'm kind of in the realm of belief
Well, I'm
rather
saying
than
no, you aren't,
you say
right?
no.
Yeah,
Okay.
because the evidence is there. Just because you don't have the evidence, it's not a fact. It's not a question of belief, right? It's we can go get the evidence. I mean, it can be demonstrated, right? You're
Mm-hmm.
just that, right? It's demonstrable, so it's not
Mm-hmm.
subject to belief, right? That's why I mean, I think that language is important because that's something people should probably try to be mindful of. Stop saying they believe in the science, right? And science, if it's science, it doesn't need to be believed, right? It needs to be understood, right? Let me try
Exactly. And I
to
think that,
understand,
and I
you
have to
know,
come back and say
so I
the
can
point
walk,
at which,
I can act scientifically or whatever. I can try to understand something scientifically,
yeah,
through again through a process of making it knowledge, right? Of
yes. And the point at
and this
which,
is
well,
knowable and
the point at which I as a person, right, I
mm-hmm,
subjectively don't have that
mm-hmm,
information is the point of my belief, not the
right.
point of the mythical nature of what
Yeah, no,
I
I understand what you
believe.
mean.
But
Yeah.
the departure, the point of departure in that conversation is, well, you know what? I got to go get some more information, which actually I think
Mm-hmm,
drives home, drives this point of the undereducation, the miseducation, right,
mm-hmm,
the general state of undereducation
mm-hmm,
for folk. What kind of level, and it's an important question to me, something I think that is worthy to pursue, and I look forward to
mm-hmm.
us pursuing it. What are the kinds of knowledges as things become so specialized, right? University training becomes so specialized, and people are training for this, that, and have no other, you know, fundamental subject literacy that
Well,
allows
that's the
you.
idea of the general ed you're supposed to do on the way, right?
Huh, interesting.
To
Mm-hmm.
get that, the first 2 years of college is supposed to be that general ed, right? That's why you're supposed to have a physical science or two as
Right.
a requirement, social science as a requirement, humanities as requirement, etc. Right? And in some places, they've ethnic studies has been added, or
Mhm. Mhm.
global citizenship or understanding, right? That is supposed to be the idea, right, of the first 2 years before
Mm.
you specialize, right?
Mhm.
Um, Now, whether people take it seriously or not is again
Whether it's
another thing,
working.
right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
again, that is the idea of the general education requirements.
But let me insert something right
Yeah.
there. You've presented a philosophy of general education. You know what I'm saying? And the
Hmm.
use in the context of that, if one is not, is not informed about that, that use, that um, doesn't take that into the process of participating in general education, then it's lost. The philosophy of general education that tends to be the reality is this is stuff I got to get out of the way.
Well,
Right.
right. 'Cause somebody has to say, the counselor should be saying,
Yes,
this is why you. But anyway, yeah, yeah.
but it
Who
ain't happening. And
is
people,
anybody talking about that? Or I mean,
yeah,
does it come up in classrooms?
is there,
Um, it
yes, and
comes,
I've heard you,
it does sometimes. I mean,
right.
but yeah, I understand exactly what the idea of the specialization, and and then getting tunnel visioned. Um, but actually, the best scientific thinking is looking at connections always, right? And and really
Right.
understanding how things are networked.
Yeah.
Um,
And there's a need for folk to have more background, more in a variety of subjects to be able to participate, to actually participate in the discussion on how these areas are moving. You know what I'm saying?
mhm.
Than folk than is offered. Than is generally offered, and not offered in that kind of advised way that you
Mhm.
are talking about. And I've heard you talk about so many times the role of liberal arts and the attack on liberal arts, or the devaluing of liberal
Yeah,
arts, the
what they call the
humanities.
humanities in particular, right? Because
Hmm.
the liberal arts includes math, right? Math, what, geometry, astronomy, and mathematics. I think the trivium, um, from which then the sciences, as we again as we often think of them,
Right.
emerge, or at least scientific inquiry as we often think of it emerges. But
Hmm.
all of it, yes, right. And I mean, some of the best writing, or maybe I should put it another way, um,
Yeah.
in order for an un or what am I trying to say, to communicate a lot of these really precise um, scientific ideas.
Hmm.
The science writers, the scientists themselves, right, have needed helpful metaphors, right? They need the language. Everybody can understand what a black hole is, right? A singularity is entirely too abstract and can mean, it maybe
Hmm.
mean things in different areas. But
Hmm.
everybody knows what a black hole is, right?
Hmm.
And what it means to be pulled into something. People can have an idea of, what strings are when you're talking about string theory, right? Or this sort of thing. Um, the need for scientists to have that language at hand, um, and to
Hmm.
know that there is art involved in what they do. Again, another a common misunderstanding of scientific inquiry and what individual scientists may experience or even believe themselves, because there are plenty of scientists, as we again as that term is
Hmm.
understood in modernity, who
Hmm.
are also believers, right, of all of these various religions, right, all over the
Hmm.
world, right, all indigenous,
Absolutely.
everything, right,
Absolutely.
and all kinds of scientists, right, dealing with the material world, you know but for them to find the language that speaks, to people, and to be grounded in their culture, right, to be able to express it, and to communicate it in a way that speaks to everybody and not just their peers. They've got their peer journals for that. Um, but it's been such a significant part of what in the United States it's been called the culture wars, right? The
Hmm. Hmm.
um, and they only reject certain sciences, right?
Right.
Or,
Hmm.
the science. I mean, they're all behind the science that produces weapons,
Absolutely.
or that can be ultimately somehow monetized in some way, right?
Yes.
Um, but not, but the scientific inquiry that challenges corporate interest,
Yes.
is what comes under attack.
Yes.
Specifically, right? They don't want organizations like what is it? Scientists for social responsibility, or physicians, or rather physicists for social responsibility, etc.
Hmm.
To have any play, right, or to
Hmm.
be in the public square. Uh,
Hmm. Hmm.
and
Hmm.
and so where's the scientific research being done? Again, at the universities, really, right? The colleges and universities,
Hmm.
mostly with public funding,
Hmm.
that produces the most fundamental and basic research that the corporations then take to do the applied research. That but
Hmm.
it's the basic research, and that's what's very much under attack, along with scientific
Yes.
instruction. Um, the figure of the scientist has long
Yes.
been under, like pop culture attack, right? The whole bad scientist thing, right? And science
Right.
out of control,
Right. Right.
etc. Um,
Hmm.
in so many areas of science too, because we're not, geological, um, archaeological, well, anthropological is what I'm really thinking of, by et cetera, right? Just all the climatology. So it's such a serious, like, frontal attack right now.
Mm-hmm.
What there were more firings at, what is the Weather Service in the United States,
Right.
the
Mm-hmm.
organization that takes care of yeah, the Weather
Right.
Service, right? The NOAA,
Right.
um, the CDC. Um,
Right.
I know that for many of us, there's suspicion about some of these groups, right? And particularly when you come from among the colonized residents of Turtle Island, all the
Mm-hmm.
various internal colonies. We know that science has been weaponized against us, right? We've been the guinea pigs, etc. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so certainly aren't talking about sort of a blind acceptance of anything,
Mm-hmm.
recognizing how scientific inquiry has also exploited us, right? Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but that's because it's it's happened in this society.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's
Mm-hmm.
what the 19th century gynecologist Dr. Sims, right,
Right.
experimenting on people,
Right.
all the various things we know, right? The general test of dropping Legionnaire's disease in Philadelphia to see, what would, just all the various things we know they've done.
Yes.
The sterilizations of African descended women here in the States and in the Caribbean, um,
Mm-hmm.
indigenous women, and etc. We know that, and at the same time, um, we're not rejecting all of the science. Our just even as individuals.
Which becomes one of those um, conversations and clarifications that needs to be had. That's
Hmm.
also part of, or kind of the not having an immediate capacity to distinguish between the abuse, between abuse
Hmm.
and pursuit of,
Hmm.
what I mean, and the pursuit itself, and
Hmm.
the right, and to also at the same time recognize those benefits that spring from researches, this kind of research and inquiry that didn't involve abuse,
Right.
of various kinds, because we can also look
Exactly.
at, you know um and one of the references that we will be getting into in this series, um the very well known um instance of the manipulation of the public through the fake expert with the tobacco scientist. What is it? However many, majority of doctors you smoke this cigarette. I
Yeah,
forget what
three
the
out of four or
was.
3 out of 5, right?
3 out of 5.
3 out of 5, right? I
Three
mean, that's
out of
just the,
five.
the, the, the typical advertising, right? 3 out of 5
Right. Three
doctors
out of
or whatever,
five.
right?
Right. And all this, right? So
I
to
don't even know if that's
appeal,
fictional or not. They just pulled that. It sounds
yeah,
good.
probably out
Three out
there.
of five dentists, right?
Well, let's see. 3 out of 5. It's right
Right.
here.
Three out
Three
of
out of
five.
five written on the toilet paper. But but which is that interesting, also that kind of interesting cultural
Yeah.
contradiction that certainly Americans have, and I don't know about other countries, but I can that's something that is observable. That contradiction between because the um, uplifting of we love scientists, we love the notion of saying studies have been done and this is scientifically proven and this and that and the other, right? And at the same time have that combat with science and also any kind of substantial understanding of how it works, and how
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
knowledge that, or a basic understanding of various kinds of studies, and
Hmm.
all studies aren't created equal. There's a lot of language
Hmm.
that's used in commercials, you know what I'm saying, like in a double blind study of we don't know what a double blind
Yeah,
study is.
people. Yeah, what is that? People
We don't
don't
know
know.
what that is.
People
We
don't know
should.
what a control group is, right? You could say
We
what's
don't
a
know what
control
that
group.
is. They don't even take that time. They don't even take that much time in school to talk about it. Because
Again, if if you aren't paying attention in middle school in science, you don't get the basics of what they call the scientific method.
you don't get the
You
basics,
might remember the word hypothesis. You might.
right? And um, with that steady, what was one of the things that was talked about, right? Well, oh, the quality of the textbooks, oh, the dismissal of the arts programs, and oh, there are no labs. There is no place to do
Exactly.
labs as part of your science program.
Right.
And where is that interactivity more crucial and more useful than with the question of scientific inquiry? So the dumbing down of
Hmm.
scientific understanding to a textbook that is also likely to be out of date, and you know what I'm saying,
Yeah.
and have all
Yes.
kinds of issues.
Exactly. And still come under attack again
And
from a
still,
particular
yeah,
constituency of parents, and
absolutely.
churchgoers can still, if it deign to mention, just what should be at this point, um, I don't want to say taken for granted, but generally widely accepted, scientifically
Yeah,
established
yeah,
theories, and that a theory is not just sort of an idea that's being proposed, but as
right,
is a way of
right,
working out an
right,
understanding of a phenomenon.
right.
Sort of ordered, uh, methodical approach, right? To,
Mhm,
and even interpretation then of it. The
mhm,
So
mhm,
again, right? None of it's by accident, right?
mhm,
Um, the the active dismantling of public education, in particular,
mhm.
because the private schools that, as particularly much of the leadership sends their children to, are fully stocked. Um,
Oh, yes.
Getting
Oh,
getting
yeah.
excellent science education for teachers
Absolutely.
who are being paid less. Typically, private school teachers are paid less,
Mm,
and aren't all typically unionized either.
hmm,
And then the emergence of the religious schools,
mhm,
and the homeschooling,
mhm,
um, often for political religious reasons,
mhm,
beginning with, we are not sending our children to these integrated schools,
mhm,
at the
mhm,
very root of the explosion
mhm,
of non-parochial, non-Catholic and Jewish for sure,
mhm,
uh, religious schools,
mhm,
that
mhm,
explode, right? These evangelical schools, that explode in the beginning in the late 60s, early 70s, and really refusing, because they refused integration, and
mhm,
let's starve the public schools. And now that's come down to the school voucher program, right? So
mhm.
let's subsidize
Choices. Mm,
wealthy children to go
yes.
to religious schools,
Mm,
and take that from your public school funding.
right, right, right,
And that's again a way to um, to starve the quality of education, the resources, um, so for students to get that basic understanding, and to be in classes where you can pay attention, because it isn't a crowd, but
right,
you have more of a 1 to 10 ratio,
right,
teacher to students or adult to student.
right.
The
And that
All
is
of this is
immediate.
doable.
That's an immediate effect, immediate,
Immediate.
observable. There is nothing fancy about it. The kids will say it themselves. Well,
Yes.
we're not talking a lot because there's not a lot of people here today. And there you are at
And
one
there it is, right,
and maybe
exactly.
15.
And
The
and
whole dynamic.
scientific research shows, right?
Yeah,
Just
yeah,
that, right? The kind of
yeah,
investment in education
yeah. Right,
to shrink these classes,
right,
public
right,
education,
right.
K through postgraduate,
Yes, yes,
pre-K, I
yes.
should say, through postgraduate. Everything that is openly under attack right now. at all levels, right? The Department of Education, all these various science-based
Yes,
agencies, right?
which I'm going to
All
read
under
an excerpt. Yeah, I'm
attack.
going to read a couple of things from Union of Concerned Scientists
Okay, there we go. Yeah.
article, right? Published yesterday, as a matter of fact, right? And the title of the article is 100 Attacks and
Um,
Counting. I'm sorry?
Before you do that,
Yeah.
do they have a website listed somewhere in the
Let me
document?
pull it up. Let me, because I closed it and just copied the page. Probably if you put the title
Yeah,
in,
I am. Union of Concerned
Concerned
Scientists.
Scientists,
Yeah.
100 Attacks,
Well, I was
maybe.
just going to put their name.
Oh, okay.
I mean, yeah, people can look them up
So,
and
yeah, and the name of the article, you might want to put the name of the article,
yeah, go ahead.
which is 100 Attacks. 100 Attacks and Counting.
800 attacks.
A,
Yeah.
the
Okay.
the
800.
article. A. Mhm.
Uh-huh.
100 Attacks and Counting. What happened to federal science in February? And this was published yesterday. Um,
What
by
happened to science in February?
Yeah, 100 attacks. And should I put it in the comments so you can?
Well, I'm typing it now, so
Okay, tell me when you got it.
just one more time, say it. What happened to
What happened to federal science in
federal science?
February?
Okay. Is that a question or a
No,
okay.
this is what
All
happened.
right.
Hmm.
There we go. Yeah, I'll get that on the screen. But go ahead. Thank you for, yeah, that was worth, just so people can go look it up.
Okay.
Oh, the 100. Anyway, that'll do.
Ready?
Hmm.
Okay. So these 100 attacks and counting. What happened to federal science in February? And so I'm just going to not go into the whole uh, starting from the beginning, and in the interest of time, but just a couple of excerpts, a couple of descriptive excerpts. Um, President Trump's executive orders signed during his first week back in university, first week back in office. Let's see what happened here. Oh boy. My okay, well, in any event, my copying of the article cut off some of the information, not the bulk of it, but I didn't see that had happened. Excuse me. Try it again. The executive orders signed during his first week back in office, and this was being referred to um, the attack on universities, nonprofit organizations, and other entities in deference to President Trump's directives due to intense backlash. The Trump administration partially rescinded the funding freeze. I'm sorry. This is what I mean by preparation. That's not what I intended to read. This is what I intended to read. I'm so sorry out there in
All right.
YouTube land. So, this is what I intended to read for the excerpt that I intended to read. For example, the NIH has continued to experience a funding freeze for weeks, impacting FAC meetings, grant dissemination and review panels, and biomedical research. This has halted advances in research ranging from cancer and diabetes to HIV and tuberculosis. As of this writing, grants are still not being awarded by the NIH, and health officials have been forbidden from giving public notice of upcoming grant review meetings. If the NIH cannot review grants, they cannot disseminate funding, and researchers at companies and universities across the country cannot conduct life saving biomedical research on disease and illness prevention and treatment. Another excerpt. The Trump administration has also given strict directions to other agencies on what research they can and cannot fund to comply with its executive orders. After freezing grant reviews at the end of January, the National Science Foundation began to review all grant applications for mentions of prohibitive words, right? That whole prohibitive words list.
Mm-hmm.
Women, people of color, activism, disability that were deemed to be related to diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, or to climate science. Similarly, the NIH and NSF, National uh, Institutes of Health, and the National Science Foundation have removed grants on accessibility research, as well as funding opportunities to encourage participation from researchers and scientists with disabilities. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, as you mentioned it earlier, NOAA, a federal agency that researches and reports on timely weather patterns, climate science, and air quality and pollution. These, and it's cut off the article, but the essence, the summary sentences, these actions have already had a negative impact on the amount of research in these areas. And so here we are. And there's a lot
Mm-hmm.
more in this article. It's a great piece, and it's not a long read. It's concise. But this, I really like the term, the comparison, just with the burning of libraries, the banning of books,
Mm-hmm.
all the burning of Alexandria, the library of
Mm-hmm.
Alexandria.
Exactly.
Just,
I mean, that's right.
just kill it, cut it off. You don't know what you're getting rid of. Just
Right.
get
And
rid
those
of
are
it.
federal agencies. Well, as I said, federal science, right? So that doesn't,
Yes.
that what the grants that again, universities is where most of the
Yes.
research happens.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so that research isn't happening now. Even these
Mm-hmm.
NIH grants, right? They're going to
Right.
universities, right?
Mm-hmm.
And why the NIH? It's just, I mean, I understand their corporate reasons, right, for not wanting to pursue the climate science and stuff, right? But why do you want an unhealthy?
It's a good question, but
Why the FDA, right? Why, what these agencies, for all of the faults of the state, right? These agencies that actually keep people safe,
well,
that
that's the
check.
point, right? It's a
Uh,
regulation question, yes.
it's a regulation question, yes, and they
FDA.
want no regulation. Again, well, and he keeps the current president keeps evoking the McKinley era, the Gilded Age, and yeah, the rich, the wealth of the era, um, but for such a few, right? As people, workers are losing limbs, at work and being burned alive in factories
Right.
and dying from ptomaine and whatnot.
Right.
This unregulated, food industry, and now again, an unregulated finance industry again, sadly, and just the deregulation efforts, the playbook of Project 2025, and these people do not believe in democracy
No.
of any form, really, and
Mhm.
they only are interested in scientific inquiry and
Mhm.
applied science insofar
Mhm.
as it can again be monetized
Mhm.
or extend their power in some kind of way. Um,
Mhm.
you know,
Mhm.
and there is a constituency for them, right? Because of the distrust of science that has been built up over the years, and I mean decades, right, of pop
Right.
culture,
Right.
sowing distrust, and again, and an ambivalence, right? Sometimes the scientist is the hero, but and even then, they're often not the hero, right? But
Right.
are the hero in some kind of way. Um,
Mhm.
Yeah, and
Mhm.
the trope of the mad scientist, right? The trope of
Mhm.
the mad scientist,
Mhm.
science out of control,
Mhm.
without critiquing
Mhm.
or putting it in the context of capitalist
Yeah.
overreach out of
Yeah.
control, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And
that.
the trope of the I'll call it a trope. I think that's fair. Um the element in the misunderstanding of science that is the scientist is as enlightened priest, the scientist as the
Hmm.
enlightened, the scientist
Yeah,
as the, you know what I mean, the
I
they'll
do.
figure it out,
Yeah,
they'll come up with something, they'll do the, you
that's
know
a
what I'm
good way of
saying,
putting it. The
this
enlightened
kind of,
priest, right? The priest of the modern material age.
yes, that always finds a way out, that always comes up with the solution
Just give them enough
to
time,
save,
right? Yeah.
just, yeah, give enough time or research, or as part of that white supremacist myth, Western myth of the eureka moment, you will see it. You know what I'm saying? Without actually giving a sensibility, because in like kind of in this discussion of philosophy of science, and how does knowing happen and how does scientific knowing happen, and the
Hmm.
conversations about the role of uh, the imagination and the intuition in science, quote unquote, scientific discovery.
Right.
And I don't really need to put it in quotes, but that comes up because of the notion that scientific thinking is somehow um, in a hierarchical status above and separate from other kinds of thinking,
Right.
specifically the imaginative and the intuitive,
Hmm.
where that's not the case. These things are all because that they're
That
wed in
is
the
not
human
the case.
economy. They're wed in the human economy.
And
And so
indeed, that's where innovation often comes from, is
this is
those
what, right.
intuitive
Oh,
moments.
now
Yeah.
I see. So the eureka moment has been maligned and
Hmm. Right.
misused as something that happens,
Right.
you know, among white men who are there to save the day for capitalism and imperialism, right on time and periodically. So all of that notwithstanding, there is that myth of we'll find a way, we'll figure it out in the nick of time, we'll save ourselves, things are gonna, because of some genius, inevitable an inevitable genius. And then when the, if you will, the priests of the sign, when the priests tell you something, you don't want to hear it, you want to reject it, you want to you want to be selective, you want to
Hmm.
cherry pick,
Exactly.
because again, that the process um of information handling and the scientific knowledge pursuit has not been properly represented, and certainly American people in general don't understand it. We,
Right. And
um,
yeah, I don't want to. I think it's primarily citizens and residents of the United States, right? I
yeah,
don't know
I
that
think
this is
it's
the
fair.
attitude in other countries, and
I gotta
um,
say, I don't know. I would
yeah,
love
I don't know that. I don't
yeah,
think, just based on the attitudes of others and the news that comes from other places, it does not seem to be that way outside of, again, maybe, religious communities that might reject some of the
right,
theories, right? But
yeah,
not,
yeah,
not to the degree and with
yeah,
the fervor and the funding of those forces in the United States, such that even among those faith communities, they are likely in the minority,
yeah,
but are well funded, platformed,
yeah,
because it is convenient, right? It is a, a relationship of convenience,
mm-hmm,
and that has always been.
mm-hmm,
Well, people are able to
mm-hmm,
live with cognitive dissonances of all kinds, and
Mm-hmm.
elevate and call holy, those who exploit others, right? who are not, who are rich men who will have difficulty getting through that eye of the needle, right? So,
Oh, oh, holy exploitation. Oh, holy exploitation. It's in
yeah,
it's for a good cause, you know. Uh,
and and particularly as these jobs dry up in the public sector or in universities, public or private, then where do scientists have to go? The private sector, right? So again, a way of driving people to the private sector
right, right.
where
Privatization. Mm-hmm.
the research isn't as
Mm-hmm.
thorough
Mm-hmm.
or
Mm-hmm.
patient, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
again, a net negative
Mm-hmm.
for research.
And so there's a
But
there's a lot of course, because of the also the ahistorical mind, right? There's a lot of not remembering and a forgetting. We like to talk about what was the book The Jungle.
hmm
That was a progressive era kind of a piece,
hmm
right?
response yeah, exactly, to the meat
That
industry at the time, and
right. And the whole
Sinclair Lewis, right, who should have
comment,
become governor of California. Well, I don't know how close he was. He was popular though.
whole comment on regulation and of capitalist interests. You can't just endlessly extract and exploit and just do any damn thing in the interest
hmm
of
hmm
building your wealth.
Of
It's
building your wealth, of the bottom line.
so but it's interesting though, talking about, well, the ahistorical, or the kind of the short memory, that short memory
hmm
that we mentioned uh, a few programs ago, that doesn't serve critical thinking. That's a
hmm
component of critical thinking. You got to have something to think with, right?
hmm
It's not just a posture and an attitude. But the question of the ideas, kind of the rhetorical, um, um, let me restate that, the rhetoric that has accompanied the pushing back against scientific, the credibility, legitimacy, and the sense of the reliability of science over the last few decades, and the kinds uh, of the notions and the different places that has centralized and landed, as in the um, creationism or its challenges to evolution, and the conversations around that, challenges to the theory of evolution, natural selection, etc., creationism, right? Intelligent design. What else have we got? Oh, the climate denial, right? There's that.
hmm
Um, and maybe there are others that you can think of. It occurred to
Well,
me that
medical science, they're and particularly the science of vaccines that you know
yes,
are
come
seriously,
lately.
deeply questioned, right?
Mm-hmm.
And which is why the title for this conversation was not just the rights war, but the political right, and in parentheses, and others,
Mm,
because again, there are those who would not, certainly
mhm,
wouldn't describe themselves as being right wing,
mhm,
but express some of the same doubts about some scientific
mhm,
stuff.
mhm.
So.
There's a way in which the that kind of grappling and that contradictory nature plays out in the right to life, uh, and anti-abortion
Mm-hmm.
um,
Mm-hmm.
language as well. because though, certainly, let me say, because I don't want to paint with a broad brush, right? Because of some kind of scientific, right, understanding and approach to information that is deeply inculcated, but to say that all folk who are right to life are also a member of this, these other communities of
Mm-hmm.
anti-scientific. Da, 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 da,
Mm-hmm.
da, da. I think
Mm-hmm.
there's clearly, I don't think that you'd have to go too far to show, to
Right.
demonstrate, right, that this is a case, that there's
It's a high
certainly
probability, right?
high
It's high
probability, right?
probability.
And yet they're so concerned, right? A
Mm-hmm.
big concern is about fetal heartbeat, when that can be discerned, when, how to pinpoint the beginning of life, and it's all organized around biological science definitions of
Mm-hmm.
living. You know what
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying? So there's that, there is this kind of that, there's a surfacing of that tension, and that, right, and that struggle, that kind of cultural struggle,
Mm-hmm.
um, that surfaces there, as well, um, in a, you know, in a conversation, in a discourse that is quite non-scientific, you know, um, quite, um, hmm, what is the word? Very comfortable in its, in defining itself, defining itself by itself, quite comfortable in its circularity, comfortable in its confirmation bias, quite comfortable, um, in another aspect that we were wanting to talk about, uh, in its religiosity, you know, and making a distinction between a scientific disposition, um, and since I've been looking at, the little red book we found yesterday, epistemic, right? This kind of a scientific epistemic uh, approach to knowing, and a religiosity and a religious approach to knowing, and the distinctions, um, between those. And not that they are inherently contradictory, but even that, the notion that they're inherently contradictory, is part of the cell of this, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
Privileging or unprivileging of the scientific approach, right? The scientific
Mm-hmm.
uh, uh, modality,
Mm-hmm.
positing that kind of
Mm-hmm.
competition. It's not necessarily
Mm-hmm.
there. You have pointed out so many
It,
times.
yeah, it isn't necessarily there, but that right, that energized sector, um, that is s- sort of the wall they batter, right, over and over again, because it is those who for or at least who proclaim, right, and organize their institutions, if not their actual moral lives, um, around God, right? The idea of God first, in all things, and that is, and their meaning usually being, the Abrahamic understanding, or the Abrahamic God, is that notion of divinity developed, right, historically, which that they ain't gonna even
Yeah.
consider, right, that even the idea of the God they worship,
Hmm.
changed over time, right, and the yeah, there, because science doesn't put God first, right, and or make God necessary. I mean, just that thing, right? Stephen Hawking's assertion, that the Big Bang, right? Studying the Big Bang, um, an unmoved mover was unnecessary, right, for it to get started. Which again, as he makes the point, doesn't mean that there isn't what people mean by God. I'm not making that argument. This is not a theological discussion, right? But that what we think of as the Big Bang, an external force of some type. Although again, even that's kind of a particular understanding of God. Um, is unnecessary, though, scientifically unnecessary. Well, there's no tolerance for that conclusion, at least
Mhm.
among, again, an energized group of
Mhm.
people, um, unwilling to or encouraged not to think with any kind of nuance,
Mhm.
or to
Mhm.
think spiritually. I mean,
Mhm.
yeah, I mean that's sort of one of the kind of ironies.
Mhm.
Um, these are often people who condemn empirical sciences for their materialism, and though they're trapped in a materialism that can only read scripture as literal, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
The,
Mhm.
instead of taking the challenge of then how do we understand this spiritually, if we know scientifically this can't be, and because they aren't, folks aren't taught, Christians aren't taught, even though I believe he is what they call the fathers of the church, right? And is accepted, and certainly in the Roman Catholic communion. I believe in the Eastern Orthodoxies, the Southern Orthodoxies, and the Protestants, right? Augustine, right? Saint Augustine of Hippo, right? The North African. Um, that I can't give you a chapter and verse,
Mhm.
but asserts that when natural science, or when investigation of the natural world, um, produces knowledge that might go counter to scripture, that understanding in scripture, it is the duty, of the believer to get a deeper understanding of scripture, right? Not to deny the science, but to see okay, so then what does this mean then in the context of that, right? You don't reject science. You don't reject, natural, um, uh, you don't reject the knowledge produced by study of the natural world, examine
Mhm.
the natural world.
Mhm.
You think you deepen your
Mhm.
religion, you
Mhm.
deepen your spiritual
Mhm.
understanding, but
Mhm.
that isn't widely taught, if it's
Mhm.
taught at all, right?
Mhm.
If it's taught at all, um,
Mhm.
and that's not an isolated view. That indeed the kind of literalism that we suffer from
Mhm.
is itself and a product of modernity, right? So again, the paradoxes of
Interesting.
modernity.
That's really interesting. Yeah.
Mhm.
That's really interesting, and also um, that point that you just raised about materialism, and using the term materialism in that way, and juxtaposing it with um, liter literalism, right? Making a material of or
Mhm.
centering on the material of
Needing it to be
the book,
historical,
right?
right? In
Of
that
the
way,
book,
right?
right? Um, rather than the immaterial nature of things spiritual, right? Or the God, and that's kind of an interesting piece in a number of ways. It made me think about the so many people describe themselves in this kind of contemporary time. A very popular description people have is, I'm spiritual, not religious. I
Mhm.
don't subscribe to a particular religion, but I'm a spiritual person. that I think speaks to um, the urge and the work to reach, to maintain the connection, and that connection with the immaterial, and with these kinds of dynamics, these kinds of spiritual dynamics, trying not to use a thing to define the thing, but
Yeah.
these kinds of dynamics, um, while recognizing this materiality of the institutionalized religion, that is
Hmm.
actually and much more about a loyalty to um, the institution and its
Hmm.
components than it is
Hmm.
to, the kind of like the sacred ethics
Yeah.
and the dynamics and these kinds of things, the experience, or certainly well, I don't know if I want to say that, but the spiritual experience,
Hmm.
of the practitioner. I didn't want to know if I want
Hmm.
to use the term mystic, you
Well,
know.
I was just going to say, but that is the mystical experience, right? That
Hmm.
direct
Yeah,
experience of spirit, right?
yeah, yeah.
However,
Which is
that
also,
unfolds for an individual in whatever tradition, right? But
which
that
is, yeah, very interesting, because it's very particular. Also, that's
and
probably worth
certainly not
talking
an
about.
experience absent in science.
And I think that it's also worth raising what vein of religiosity we're talking about when we talk about the religiosity and the religious tendencies and mores of the United States. What does the Puritan tradition indicate in
Mhm.
comparison to other traditions,
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
are in, under the Christian
Mhm.
umbrella, but not in the same modality. And
Mhm.
maybe, that also might give some insights into the kind of
Mhm.
particular manifestation of religiosity. But yeah, it absolutely becomes, the way, um, the article of faith literally becomes the material of faith. I want to use the term relic. I don't want to misuse the term relic, because I'm not Catholic and I haven't been.
Which indicates materiality,
But yes,
right?
and this
Yeah.
thing is imbued,
Yeah.
with,
Mhm.
you know, um, with spiritual potency, power, abilities, capacities, transformative capacities, and whatever else. Um, and absolutely, that is the way that the religion is treated, and how it becomes this kind of us versus them. You
And of
know,
course, I mean, you that would be just the sort of thing that Puritans are trying to purify, right? The elimination of the use of relics or the role of the
right,
relic or something
right,
like that, right?
right,
Yeah.
right. Um, but so the last thing that I wanted to, I don't mean
But the
last.
Puritans are only one of the many groups, right? That settled
Hmm.
and for religious reasons,
Hmm.
and probably have an outsized. I don't even sure an outsized influence, but an outsized notion of their influence on what becomes, religiosity in the United States.
But in the event, the whatever is religiosity in the United States has its particular character,
Yes, it does.
and can be looked at,
And a
right?
lot of that has to
With
do with those
particular element.
periods called the Great Awakenings,
Uh-huh.
which would have had a lot to do with itinerant preachers, right? Going around during the
Yes.
colonial period, and then shortly
Yes.
after, having a lot to do with it as much. Yeah.
Yes. One of the things that I wanted to refer back to,
Well, before you do, um, a recent episode of Family Guy, I thought it was really funny. Uh, uh, Peter Griffin is talking to God. Um, And Peter asks, right, do atheists go to heaven? And God said, sure, yeah, good people, right? What about people who say they're spiritual but not religious? They go to the worst part of hell. And that came to mind when you write, because it was so recent, actually.
Okay.
And yet it resonated with me too in this particular way. That yeah, they go to the worst, the deepest hell of hells, right? It's like that's funny. But anyway, I'm sorry. It's
Yeah, no, just
that
wanted
little
to
levity.
step back to this question of some of those kind of identifiable um, expressions that have, kind of track with um, the pushback, the resistance to the scientific, and the, kind of like the track back, all of these different elements. And something that really, I think, most clearly surfaced, or to my memory, I would say, most clearly surfaced, uh, came with that climate science denial, the elevation of both sides, right? The both sides
One
notion,
of the
this thing
delaying tactics.
appearing,
Yeah,
huh?
that's one of the delaying tactics.
And yes, this thing that appears as it appears to be a logic, it appears to be an ethic, right? Of somehow related to good journalism. It appears to be
Objectivity, this notion of objectivity,
exactly. It appears to be an
balance.
ethic related to right. Appears to be a scientific kind of approach, or something
Hmm.
that is akin, to that, but has been so used to um muddy the waters, to obfuscate the questions that are being raised. Never
Right.
mind, it's not even be never mind being a deliberative space, which the mainstream media does not create space for. There is no space for that. It's a spectacle of one liners and buzz notions and talking points and what have you. But there's not even room for a debate. So
So
there's no
I'd be interested in knowing, because I didn't watch this television show with any regularity to know, but it was popular for a very long time. The Big Bang Theory, which was about the main characters are scientists. So I want I'm that
what that
comment
look like.
made me wonder if there was any sense of that deliberative character, right? And um,
The Big Bang
you
Theory.
know,
If I know the program, it was a sitcom.
yeah,
That
it's a
involved
sitcom, but
scientists,
that doesn't mean that it can't,
at its no, it
that it
doesn't mean
can't
that it
present
can't.
those ideas, right? And that it
That would
can't
be
present
interesting to see.
characters in scientific debate, right?
That would be
But
interesting.
certainly that's not the center of it, right? It's just like any other sitcom, the
Yeah,
shenanigans and
with yeah,
the,
some
typical
actual
situations they get in.
stereotyped characters.
Yeah.
Even in the scientific community that it's supposed to be taking place in. You have a super nerd among the nerds. You have a sexy girl scientist. You have the kind of typical
Hmm.
array of characters,
Hmm.
that are
Where are they
typical
having those
of
conversations, right?
language.
Do we get to see them deliberate ever?
Don't
Uh,
know, but what I wanted
and
to
yeah,
say,
and I don't. Yeah, I
yeah,
mean, I think I've caught some edges of that a little bit, but
yeah.
it's
So, but
again,
yeah,
it's
what I
not the
wanted to say
center
was
of the
that
story.
certainly in mainstream, in those in the uh, uh, journalistic forums where these non discourses were dignified, right? Dignified with presentation, right? These forms that are considered respectable, forms, and they're talking this both sides BS and bringing in people that are, what I'm saying, like some of those really
That is the practice of liberal journalism, and yeah. both sides. Um,
But also something that was made a an agency of misrepresentation, an agent of
mhm,
disinformation. I mean,
mhm.
there is certainly space, which is why
To
it
keep
worked.
the scientific assertion that might be um, again, against corporate interest, keep it in dispute, right? And this idea that it's in dispute.
Exactly. So the impression, right? The end impression that is left is that there is this ongoing dispute because what you had
Mhm,
was folks like I remember Bill Nye was actually all over the place during this time. He was
mhm,
a person who was often featured, and how
mhm,
many times he was in a, session with some of these representatives, some of these counter representatives, and they are, as they're refining this approach and this kind of style of having these interactions, and they're just going on and looking emotional and looking passionate and not, it's not even respecting the outlines of a debate, which we see with the Trump approach to debate, right? Just keep talking. Don't let the other person get a word in edgewise. Don't answer any questions. Just keep throwing out your points and shaking your finger at the other person and the whole, what I'm talking about, and you're being disingenuous, and this isn't true. And all of these uh uh kinds of like modes and make these mannerisms, that passed for conversation that really weren't, conversation, and that helped to usher in a whole era of confusion, which really, if those conversations were actually supported and allowed to unfold or pan out, and what I'm saying, with the help of the hosting journalist, then a lot of debunking could have happened in real time, or what I'm saying, a lot of the weakness of these kinds of positions and
Well, that's the
arguments
weakness
really
of
been
the
debunked.
journalism, right?
Yeah,
Which can again, why would they, when they are owned by the same corporations who have an interest in
yeah,
debunking the science, right? And
yeah, yeah.
um, you know, simply put, and again, that's I think can never be underestimated, under determined. The role of the economic interest involved, the political economy of science, and under capitalism,
Hmm. Hmm.
and that is
Right.
that's
Right.
and particularly in as the United States practices it, where there is next to no, or certainly a again cultivated lack of I want to say civic engagement, but even civic spirit. That's
Mm-hmm.
and that's civic
Mm-hmm.
spirit in that sense, or communal spirit in that sense, to
Mm-hmm.
under to even support the notion
Mm-hmm.
that science, and what we call pure science, right? Basic science, science just to know or understand before it's applied,
Mm-hmm.
and then and when it is applied, should be applied in a way that's going to benefit, you know, the most of us, and
Mm-hmm.
the most of us, including the non-human
Right.
world.
Right. Right. Yes.
That's just
Mm.
just the opposite is cultivated,
Yes.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And even these ideological notions of the the capacity of the earth, right, to provide resources forever, for exploitation, and people forever for exploitation, um,
Mm-hmm.
and even contradictory narratives. But um, we weren't planning on going 2 hours, so
Right. And we are 20 minutes shy of that.
yes,
And
we are.
time to
And we know
get
we're
on.
going to continue the discussion,
Yes.
um, at, like on this attack on science and its real effects, right, and the real life effects that people may be feeling soon.
Yeah.
Um, and again, what kind of science gets supported, what doesn't get supported, um, and its inseparability from the attack on education broadly.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, education it should also be about the production of knowledge, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that is what science is, right? The production of knowledge, and a way of producing knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
so that we can have confidence in it until
Mm-hmm.
we get more facts, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then we can update it, because again, it's open ended. And I'm reminded of the quotation in the I believe from Niger, movie Brightness.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I forget the Yaleen or Yelan.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember where the long E is right now.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
what is the character? The Dogon characters say,
Mm-hmm.
science is infinite and
Mm-hmm.
miracles are eternal, right?
Hmm.
And again, finding no contradiction,
Mm-hmm.
but indeed almost an interdependence, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
aspects of experiencing this world. So, um, I, you know, cultivating that attitude, right? Anyway, yeah, we're coming up on almost 2 hours, and we ain't trying to do two
No,
hours.
we're not. We're gonna let this last 20 minutes go.
We're gonna let the last 20 minutes go, but pick it back up, right? And
Yes.
because it's again, this might be having very immediate effect, just in terms of the agencies that are being gutted. Um,
Absolutely.
what that's going to mean for research in all areas, what that's going to mean for regulation, right? And what that's going to
Absolutely.
mean for the climate, and which
Yes.
again is going to affect all of us, our food,
Yes.
everything.
Yes.
What it's going to mean for not not a false narrative of scarcity, but the production of scarcity, under
Yes.
these conditions, um,
Yes.
possibly. So anyway, um,
Yes. And
we're
an
gonna
increasingly,
continue the conversation.
yes, I was just gonna say, an increasingly dwindling uh uh reservoir of knowledge for the people to draw on to challenge and
Hmm.
to have any discernment about what's happening
Hmm.
around them, while the
Hmm.
folks who are, doing the puppeteering
Yeah.
are commanding and designing the narrative to, you know what I'm saying? And it increasingly
Hmm.
becomes this this issue of belief in the government and
Hmm.
the governors,
Hmm.
and so
We should not leave unremarked, that, like everything else, people are resisting.
yes,
There was the movement last Friday, right? Stand up for science, and there were
yes,
demonstrations throughout the country, and certainly a really huge one in Washington.
mm-hmm,
Scientists and supporters of science,
mm-hmm,
and this drive to dismantle these specific agencies, that are doing scientific research, um, that are using science to keep the population safe in various ways.
mm-hmm,
Um, and and just folks are against that, and a majority, right, a super majority, are against the dismantling of the Department of Education. These are not popular ideas. Whatever mandate they think they have, and I don't think they
They
actually
don't
think
think
they
they
have
do.
a mandate. They're
Mm-mm.
just saying so, right?
Yeah.
And acting
Yes.
as if,
Yes.
but they don't. These are very unpopular.
Yes.
The idea of dismantling the Department of Education is extremely unpopular across the board with citizens and
Mm.
residents of the United States. So, um, you know, so people are resisting. People are going to continue to resist. We'll end up seeing what all that ends up looking like.
Mm.
Um, as again, we know this particular regime is attacking on all fronts, right? And partly to make it difficult to respond, but
Mhm.
they're also increasing their own unpopularity, right? So and and will be in danger of losing their base. Or Trump, it may be a cult, but people leave cults. Cults do dissolve, deconstruct, etc.
Yeah.
Right? It does happen.
Right.
Um,
Lose wind.
it,
Hmm.
right. So
Hmm.
anyway, let's go ahead and say good night.
Let's say good night.
And we'll be back at it. Well, we'll be back at it. Oh, actually, next Thursday. Yeah, I guess we can be back at it. If we're doing 7 o'clock Pacific time, because I'm supposed to be in Cincinnati next Thursday.
Yeah.
Um, and so however many hours ahead Cincinnati is, I don't recall whether it's 2 or 3 hours ahead. Um, 7 o'clock for you means 9 or 10 for me, which ain't nothing
Not
for me.
not a thing. Ain't
So I
nothing
guess so
thing.
it doesn't matter. We'll be back, right? We'll be back next week, 7 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time, and continue with this conversation on this. The war on science is part of the war on the modern world, and an attempt to take us back. One of the contradictions, they want to be tech monarchs, which requires certain kinds of science.
Mm-hmm.
It's the kind of science, that
Yeah.
they can apply and make money, and and increase
Mm-hmm.
surveillance and all this, those technical material applications, not knowledge for the sake of knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
or knowledge for the sake of humanity. How about that? Right? Or
Yeah.
cleaning the planet,
Yeah.
etc.
And knowledge.
Anyway,
Yes, and the way in which knowledge is a the common knowledge, and knowledge is a common good, and knowledge is a
knowledge
human
is a
right.
common
There's a
good,
reason for
human,
that, because knowledge
a
is
human
power,
right.
and they don't intend to make themselves ignorant, but I don't think that it can be avoided. You know what I'm
No,
saying? They
no,
intend to make the
and that too is part
masses
of the
ignorant
the
and
um,
therefore less able
the
and
attack on the Department of Education, right?
to
Fewer
organize
educated,
resist.
highly educated people. Yeah, it's real simple, right? Again, get
Yeah.
back to the good old days before the GI Bill, exploded the college population, right, to folks outside of a privileged few,
Yes,
and
indeed.
something, yeah, something
Yes.
more akin to the HBCUs for everybody, right? This federal funding, but they're trying to get back to before that. Um, Fewer educated people, easier to control,
That's it.
easier to control those scientists, to
Plantation logic. Yep.
control that. You know, um, where they aren't constricting science?
Uh,
China,
oh, where on
Canada,
earth?
where?
Right.
Yeah, China, Canada,
Which is another thing that
Cuba,
we must keep
the
ourselves
UK,
reminded of. That's
South
right.
Africa. I mean, the
Yeah.
where and but China is second in how much research is produced, right? Second to the United States. That won't remain the case for long under these
Not long at
circumstances,
all. Not long
and
at
by a
all.
lot, right? The U.S. is out ahead. U.S. and China are both out ahead by a lot, but the U.S. is not ahead of China by a whole lot. So that's going to regress. And then maybe, I say, like the Sahelian states free up, and other places like
Yep.
free up and can
Yeah.
rejigger their budgets.
Yep.
Scientific research can go up. University of Natal, KwaZulu, and the or is it KwaZulu Natal? University of Dar es Salaam, University of Cairo, et cetera, right? Mumbai, right? They can all increase their research funds. Somebody will step into the void, and
Absolutely.
professors can find jobs in other places.
Absolutely.
And the United States will continue to fall behind. Um,
Because it'll be difficult, and we're picking this conversation up again next week, but
yeah,
it's
we
going to
are.
be difficult to, after all of this, the mess that is made of infrastructure, and just after all the confusion that they'll be able to cause. And let's say, in the best of all possible worlds, they only have 4 years to do it. Let's hope that you know what I mean. But
Let's hope that,
even
yeah.
of all possible worlds, it will have a lasting impact. The impact of this mess in and of itself is going to, have the U.S. struggling to catch up for who knows how long. You know.
Hmm.
Hmm. Anyway,
So we'll
here
end there.
we'll end there.
Um, Folks on YouTube, please subscribe if you haven't. Please like and please share. And if you're watching us on Facebook, please like it, please share it. Get the word out. And we'll be back next Thursday. See y'all then.
See y'all then.